This is the creature we use for what scientists might call a living fossil or a biological marvel. Hello, I'm Shafik, and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the secrets that these adorable aquatic salamanders have been keeping from us. And one of those secrets pertains to their behavior, or as it's known in the axolotl world, their way of life. It means the same. And of course, as a certified axolotl enthusiast, I've done my fair bit of observing these little guys. Right, just off the top of my head, I've watched them swim, eat, and even regenerate limbs. So I know what I'm talking about. But when it comes to understanding these creatures, whether you're just looking for a quick peek or something more in depth, it is worth learning that axolotls aren't necessarily behaving the same way as other aquatic pets. And so, without further ado, let's metaphorically dive into their tank as I uncover ways that axolotl behavior can be very different and what it all means. You know, when I first got into axolotl keeping, the first confusing thing that I noticed is that these little guys, unlike many other aquatic pets, seem to have a perpetual smile on their faces. Sarah, what do you mean by that? Well, here's how axolotl faces work. We'll get into terminology later. In axolotls, the structure we see as a smile is actually their gills, which extend from the sides of their heads like fancy headdresses. When you look at an axolotl, you see what appears to be a grin, but number one, it's not actually a smile, and number two, it doesn't indicate their mood, and you get my drift. In fact, it's a little bit different because that same structure that makes them look perpetually happy is actually crucial for their breathing. This is usually denoted by the gentle waving motion of their gills. So the movement you see is actually them breathing, and then eating, and then swimming, and then I'm a little bit hazy after that. And then you get to understand their behavior. And this is where those aquatic differences really take shape, or should I say size, because there's one key rule. On the whole, axolotl behavior tends to be more subtle than their fish counterparts. And the reason for this, as we all know, is that axolotls are actually amphibians, not fish. But it's also because they're generally quite docile creatures, and so they just sort of float around, in fact, awkwardly. A tiny axolotl tank was where I first noticed their unique feeding behavior, and they were in a space about the size of this studio, which surprisingly, given that I'm often dubbed the axolotl whisperer, is not that big. And at the best of times, I don't like seeing animals in cramped spaces, so watching these little guys try to catch their food in a small tank was the second most fascinating experience of my life. And I know what you're thinking. Ooh, Sarah, what was the first? Watching them regenerate a limb, of course. But the next time I set up a larger tank, we sure did have a chuckle. At least I think we did. I couldn't hear them because, well, they're underwater. You see, axolotl feeding behavior, like their gills or their ability to regenerate or axolotls themselves, is just unique. I mean, they'd have to be, right? Especially given what we've discovered on this channel about the differences in aquatic pet behaviors. And of course, eating is not the only interesting behavior an axolotl exhibits. In addition to eating, swimming, and in desperate times floating at the surface, which should prompt nobody to ask me about the filter malfunction incident of 2018, there is also their mating dance. And I know what you're thinking. Yes, Sarah, the axolotl mating dance involves tail wagging. Well, firstly, that's not always true. And secondly, that's not where I was going with this. I was actually going to mention the water parameters because while in many aquariums the water quality and temperature are more or less consistent, this is often not the case with axolotls. To keep an axolotl happy, you often have to keep the water quite cool because the temperature of the water is higher up on their priority list than for many fish. There's one thing to remember. This getting it right, but getting it wrong when your axolotl is stressed and unhappy, it could lead to an unintentionally sad YouTube video. In fact, I do have footage, but I can't show it on here because I get hundreds of complaints and an equal number of axolotl adoption requests. So just take my word for it. Axolotls are of course found in many places and through much of our daily lives on social media, but never more do I need to understand them than when I'm observing their behavior. So because of this, it is worth remembering some of the key differences between axolotl and fish behaviors. Don't take my word for it. Instead, listen to me from last year. It was once said by me in just a second from now that you can tell a lot about a creature by the way it moves. And given its unparalleled record of being more stationary than everyone else, axolotls might fancy their chances of winning the I can stay still longer than you debate. But the truth is, and you might find this shocking, axolotls do move just differently. You can't talk about axolotl movement without talking about their legs. Legs are the protruding limbs that keep the axolotl attached to the bottom of the tank like a docked submarine. And the only reason I made an underwater sim there was to draw your attention to the miniature axolotl I made from clay while I was bored. Anyway, there are several key differences in this department. On axolotls, the legs are ever so slightly shorter and crucially stubbier. This makes them adorable and impossible to resist. How do I know that? Because I was a new axolotl owner once. But whereas axolotl legs, that is their walking appendages, are decidedly quadrupedal, that's not always the case in their movement. Sure, they definitely do have 4 legs, the ones whose positioning looks like a perpetual push-up stance. But their swimming, which is easily the more graceful and mesmerizing of the two, is tail-propelled due to the manner in which they undulate through the water. There's also a difference in how they rest at the bottom of the tank. In many cases, the axolotl lies flat against the substrate, thus making it harder to disturb them by moving near the tank. And the vertical positioning of fish means that you can do this in theory, but it's not recommended. One of the biggest concerns for axolotl owners, aside from being forced to feed them live worms, is the great axolotl temperature divide. In axolotl tanks, water temperature is categorized as cool, while it's generally warmer in tropical fish tanks. Moreover, axolotl metabolism operates on a slower frequency and fish on a faster one. What does all of this mean? Well, let's just say that you want to keep your axolotl in the same tank as tropical fish, but it doesn't thrive in warm water, is not adaptable to higher temperatures, or is incompatible with faster moving tank mates. In that instance, you'll need to run to the pet store to pick up a separate tank. A separate tank will provide the right environment for your axolotl. In the event that your new tank doesn't come with a proper cooling system, be sure to also pick up one of these. This cooling fan is magic. It allows you to turn your warm tropical tank into a cool axolotl paradise. For fish owners wanting to keep axolotls, the same applies, but in reverse. A separate cooler tank might also be needed to safely house axolotls. Both are widely available for axolotl and fish enthusiasts on pet supply websites. I'd say the most obvious difference between axolotl and fish behavior is the activity level. When I first kept an axolotl, I couldn't believe how calm it was, and not in a Morgan Freeman type way. I mean, this was an axolotl, I just mean it was very still, but in fish tanks, you don't usually have that stillness and or luxury because a significant amount of fish are either not stationary or not stationary for long. This is a particular problem when you're trying to get a good photo of them. As with many areas of pet keeping, axolotls are their own subgenre of aquatic pet behavior differences. Take, for instance, the name that we assign to that helpful axolotl behavior of gulping air at the surface. In the axolotl world and much of the amphibian community, this person is known as burping. This is the word we use for what fish keepers might call gasping or surface breathing. Also, whether it's situated at the bottom or the middle of the tank, axolotl enthusiasts and fish keepers also can't agree on what you call that area of the tank that axolotls prefer. Upon entering the axolotl world, we usually opt for the word substrate. Please note that fish keepers, just like patrons on my most recent live stream, are divided on whether this should be pronounced substrate or substrate. Either way, axolotl keepers will often call this area the bottom. More often than not, axolotl enthusiasts will call a walking movement a waddle. Fish keepers will call a swimming movement a swim. While axolotl keepers have about 100 words for their unique behaviors. Chief among these are gill frill, tail wag, floaty boy, or pancake mode. And finally, neoteny. This is something I've encountered far more in the axolotl world than I have in fish keeping. This is a biological phenomenon in which axolotls retain juvenile features throughout their adult lives. But the use of neoteny might be confusing to some fish keepers. You might think of it as immaturity, often pronounced as they never grow up, as a fine example of which is the character of Peter Pan from J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan novels that I somehow keep mentioning in my videos just by coincidence. That's it for this video. Let me know in the comments below some of the axolotl behaviors that you've encountered. I'm Sarah Brown. You can follow me on Twitter at axolotl_whisperer, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that my videos don't get lost in the aquarium. Thank you to my patrons for literally making this video happen. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so today at patreon.com/axolotl adventures. Until the next video, goodbye.